I'm emailing him just in case.
All right. Yeah, see, there's more participants now, so you can see. Let's just check to make sure everybody's here is here.
Those are all part of, nope,
Yeah,
not
I don't
yet.
see them. Okay. 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 We'll Good evening, everyone. This is December 8th meeting of the Village of Mamaroneck Planning Board. We have 4 applications on the agenda tonight. 2 are public hearings. So if you're attending, expecting or wanting to speak on those, either of those 2 applications, we'll have a discussion and some new information possibly presented to us before then, and then we'll take your comments. And then there's another application, site plan review, and then we have an administrative item at 715 Mamaroneck Avenue to talk about the secret process for that application. But first up, we have the minutes from the meeting on November 10th, 2021, which was our last meeting. Does everybody had a chance to read them? Oh, there's John. Hi, John. Oh, I have to do the attendance for the minute taker. Okay, all members of the planning board are here. Myself, Richard Littman, Cindy Goldstein, Ellen Styler, our land use board secretary, Brittany O'Neill is here. Our consultants, Teresa Bachner, Aaron Werner is here from AKRF tonight, John Keller from Keller Sessions, and Susan Oakley from Terra Landscaping, Landscape Design. Okay, now we have the minutes from November 10th. They were in our digital package this week. Does anybody have any comments, questions, concerns, anything you want to say about the minutes? Anything. All right, can I have a motion to approve the minutes as presented to us then?
So moved.
I'll second.
Okay, Ellen,
Yes.
Cindy,
Yes.
Richard,
Yes.
and I vote yes. Okay, and joining us now is our building inspector, Frank Tavolacci, so the minutes can reflect his presence. Okay. Okay, we have a, next item is Foreshore Road.
You're on there?
Yeah.
Oh, I got a shot.
Sorry, who's, okay, Foreshore Road. It's an application for a wetlands permit that first came to us in June, July, and then went to HCZM for a consistency review. They're finished with HCZM. Everyone on the planning board has seen their draft resolution of consistency. Final yet, but we get an advanced copy. And tonight we're then going to come back to the application. We haven't seen it in a while, so anyone who's here for Foreshore Road, if you make yourself known, Brittany can promote you to panelists and you can present the application to us. It's been a while, so remind us what we're here for. It's a dock. There we are. Okay.
Hi, good evening. I'm Azure D. Sleitcher from Race Coastal Engineering on behalf of the applicant Robert Goodman of Foreshore Road. As mentioned, we are seeking a wetlands permit for a proposed dock at the Foreshore Road property with a gangway and concrete landing that will be fixed atop the existing seawall. So it will be a landing, a new gangway, and floating dock, which will be removed during the winter months. So it's a seasonal boating dock. The gangway is 3 feet wide by 40 feet long, and the floating dock is 8 by 20 and secured by 4 anchor pilings. The foundation that's on the land top of the seawall, land side of the seawall, will be concrete and approximately 5 by 4 with steps incorporated so that you walk up and over the top of the seawall down the gangway to the floating dock. We have all of our state and federal approvals. And as mentioned, we've been before this board as well as back in the summer and through Harbor Coastal Zone and Board of Architectural Review. So this is hopefully our last stop.
Okay, I think you might have to go to back to BAR once we're approved. I don't know if they could give you final approval until we act, but that if they've given you conditional approval before you come here, then that shouldn't be a problem. But Brittany, somebody can advise you on that. Okay, thank you. Was there any major changes since we first saw the application? Anything that HCZM changed in the design or anything that was done?
Nothing substantial. So the major components remain as originally proposed and permitted by DEC and Army Corps. The only thing that Harbor Coastal Zone requested was that the new concrete, so a portion of the top of the seawall will be removed and concrete in its place, and Harbor Coastal Zone asked that the concrete be faced with a stone veneer on the outside face of the seawall so that it would look consistent from offshore looking back at the property. But that's the only change.
Okay, thank you.
If anyone needs, I can share my screen if anyone needs to see the plans.
Does anybody want to see? I mean, we got the package. Does anybody want to see? I mean, maybe for the public, if you want to just, Brittany, if you want to let her share her screen.
I think it would be good for the public to share the screen.
Right, that's what I just said. Right.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. I said it very small. Yeah, right. All right. Yeah, just give us an overview of.
So these are the construction drawings. This is an aerial photo of the site and the location off of the seawall in the water where the dock is to be located. Just skip ahead through the notes. But there is that peninsula. So what you're seeing here is the top of the seawall, and there's an existing stone patio. So a portion of the top of the wall will be removed as seen in this cross section, and this concrete landing, which will support the gangway as well as serve as the stairs coming up, will be cast in place atop the seawall and in the place of the existing patio area. Again, the gangway will attach to it. You go down to the floating dock, and it's secured by 4 pilings. There's also cross bracing across the bottom of the pilings to prevent the dock from sitting in the mud during extreme low tides. So that was a requirement of the Army Corps if the water conditions were less than 2.5 feet at low tide, which we believe they were. However, that was one condition of the Harbor Coastal Zone that we incorporate these braces regardless of the water depth. So we incorporated that into the project. So that is one additional change. And that's that.
Okay. Let's take that down. I think that we'd like to hear from John Kellard Sessions. I know you reviewed this for Harbor Coastal, and we do have a memo from you that you updated for the planning board. Do you have anything that you want to highlight?
No, the applicant obtained their state and federal permits, and I have no further comments on the application.
Great. AKRF, our planning consultant, does AKRF have any comments or anything to point out for the board on this particular? I think the last memo was to HCZM. We also got a copy of that as well, but it was back in October.
Yeah, we have Sarah Porter from AKRF filling in for Ashley tonight. Hi, everybody. Yeah, October 15th, we did provide a memo to the HCZMC. It was mostly on natural resources concerns. Someone from our office in natural resources wrote that memo. We didn't find any issues. We have no further comments at this time.
Okay, anybody from the board have any comments or questions for the applicant or for any of our consultants at this point in time? And then we'll open the public hearing. No, it's pretty straightforward. Okay, I need a motion now. We had opened a public hearing back in July when we started this application, but so much time has passed, it had to be renoticed and reopened. So I need a motion to open the public hearing.
So moved.
So moved.
Oh, I'll second.
Okay, great. Okay, Richard,
Yes.
Cindy,
Yes.
Ellen,
Yes.
and I vote yes. Okay, so the public hearing is open. If there's any member of the public, again, this is a wetland. Any members of the public, please raise your hand and you'll be promoted so that you could speak to the board. Brittany, do you see anybody?
Nope.
Okay. Should we wait a few more minutes? No, this was the first item on the agenda. People, if they wanted, should have signed on early. Yeah. Teresa, are you comfortable with us closing the public hearing since there's no one?
I don't remember any commentary at the original hearing, so
There was.
I would move to close the public hearing.
Do I have a second on that?
I'll second.
Cindy, you were muted. You lost your opportunity. All right. Cindy, do you agree? Unmute yourself.
Yes, I agree.
Ellen,
Yes.
Richard,
Yes.
and I vote yes. Okay. So is the board agreeable to direct our land use attorney to prepare a resolution for our next meeting to approve the permit?
Yes.
Yes.
Nodding. Okay. So let's put this on the agenda for our next meeting, and Teresa, if you could get a resolution to us and to the applicant, and we'll hopefully wrap this up. It doesn't seem like there's any obstacles in the way at the next meeting.
Will do.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Just as a just clarification, do I need to be present at the next meeting to hear this resolution?
Not necessarily. We'll do it by Zoom again, obviously, but it is close to Christmas. It'll be the 22nd of December, so if you're planning on traveling.
I should be available. I just,
Not everybody comes to the last meeting. You'll get a copy of the resolution. If there's any, the only condition will be anything that was in the HCZM resolution. We'll just echo that over.
Okay.
Unless there's something else that, but I don't think there is. Okay.
Fair enough. Great. Thank you so much. Have a good night.
Okay. Good night.
Bye-bye.
Okay. This brings us to the next item on the agenda, which is 1205. 1205 West Boston Post Road, more commonly known in the village as McDonald's. The applicant has proposed some interior and exterior renovations to the restaurant. They're not extensive renovations. That was a matter of great discussion between McDonald's and the village before they came to the planning board. Some of you may be aware that there's a village, there's a section of the village code that does not allow drive-through restaurants, and McDonald's was grandfathered in at the time, and any extensive renovations to the property would cause them to lose that ability, and so they chose not to do anything other than the facade and some ADA compliant changes to the parking lot. and some interior renovations that they hope will improve efficiency. So unfortunately, the biggest problem I think everybody notices about McDonald's is the traffic and the people waiting to make both a right turn and a left turn to the drive-through, but this could not be addressed with this application. There's really, at this point in time, not much we can do. So can we promote the applicant? I think they answered everything from our last meeting.
Everybody could just raise their hand. I know there's a couple extra names I don't recognize.
We had a list of requests of information. We needed an additional drawing. We needed facade rendering. We needed responses to the Killard Sessions memo on engineering, which I know we received. So,
Good evening.
okay, good evening.
How are you? Darius Shafazada with Harris Beach for the applicant McDonald's, here with Alex Lomé from Bowler Engineering. Thank you for hearing us tonight. We are continued public hearing on this. I think the chair summarized our application pretty well. The engineering, we submitted some additional plans, responded to a number of the landscaping and engineering issues and some of the other issues I think anyone had. Mr. Lomé is here to walk through any engineering issues or questions or landscape issues that you have. I'll be glad to answer any questions also.
Okay.
Thank you, Darius. Just very quickly, I did receive the memos from Tarabella as well as Killard Sessions. Looks like just a few minor outstanding comments from the Killard Sessions memo. I think we have to adjust the dimension to be more clearly to the narrowest point of the bypass lane, which we will agree to do. There's no issues there, as well as adding a label for the sidewalk as well that was mentioned. Relative to the landscape comments, we did add 2 trees along Boston Post Road in a current landscape aisle along the frontage there. There was a comment to add additional trees potentially if we could. There is an existing hedgerow to the east side of the site, which we were not proposing to change or add any trees in there. There's also some overhead wires over there, so we would prefer to avoid that area if possible for an additional tree. However, if the planning board would like to see that, I think we could squeeze an additional tree in, maybe remove a hedge or 2 in that hedgerow and put one of the trees in there as well. So,
Can you
oh, sure.
show the area you're talking about?
Yes, I apologize.
You don't have it memorized the way you do.
And I'm also looking at it on my screen to the right here. So I have the landscape plan up that was included in the last round of plans that went into the board. So
Okay.
2 trees that were added are shown here. The area I was referencing is this hedgerow along the east side of the site as well. There are some overhead wires in the area, and wasn't shown on the survey, but this utility pole with the light on it does also have an overhead wire that runs across Boston Post Road in the existing condition. But I do think there's potential we can maybe remove a shrub or 2, one or 2 of these hedges, and add an additional tree. I'll zoom in so you can see a little bit better. And add an additional tree similar to the ones on the west side as well, if the planning board would like to see that. I just trying to avoid being too close to overhead wires over there.
Okay.
But essentially, those are, I believe, are the outstanding comments in the 2 memos. And just one thing I'd like to offer to the board, just based on discussion last time. I did check with McDonald's, see if they have any data for the internal renovations and the upgrades to the kitchen that they make from a food processing and order processing perspective. Their data indicates, and their experience is that with those the interior renovations, the overall efficiency of the drive-through does see an uptick of about 50%. So the idea would be that they would be able to process these orders faster, get cars to the drive-through faster, and help to alleviate some of the traffic issues on Boston Post Road. So I did want to report that for the board, especially since the traffic was brought up. I just wanted to offer that so that you guys have that on record. And that was the feedback that we got from McDonald's. So I think that's a benefit to the processing from the drive-through perspective and the traffic.
Oh, great. Thank you for getting that information. It really is, I think, one of the biggest issues of traffic along the Boston Post Road. Anybody who from around here knows to stay away from McDonald's at meal times, unless you're going to McDonald's for meals. Okay, John, do you have any comment for the engineering part of what Mr. Lomai just said?
No, Alex submitted revised drawings, addressed all our comments. We had, as Alex mentioned, we had 2 minor comments on clarification on the plans, which I'm sure he could easily address.
Absolutely.
Okay. Okay, and with regards to the landscaping, we have the memo too from Terabella, and I think the concern is the frontage on Boston Post Road itself. I think the hedgerow that you were just showing is along the side there where the exit is onto the street, whose name I can't remember right now. Now, I know it's very difficult to plan to put trees on Boston Post Road. We've had this with other applications where once you start digging. So let me see, here's the entrance.
Here's the entrance, and this is all concrete and
Boston Post
sidewalk.
Road. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, this is Boston.
Of course,
Post Road.
there's wires and things underneath that and
Correct.
what else? So if you start digging up, you're not sure. So this is still on Boston Post Road along there where the hedges are.
Correct.
Okay, so that would be an option if the planning board so choose to remove some of the hedges and put in some trees. Which one?
I think we could maybe fit one just between all the overhead wires and the underground infrastructure. I'm thinking somewhere between these 3 or 4 hedges, maybe we could take 1 or 2 of those out and replace with a tree if the planning board would like to see that.
Susan, do you have any comment about that? A tree versus hedge? You know?
Well, you get the benefit with a tree, you get the benefit of some shade and aesthetic
Right.
canopy above, as opposed to just, from the waist below, which that's what the hedge is. It's pretty
Right.
low hedge.
Right. Okay. All right. That's a good, possibly a good workaround. Okay. Any member of the planning board have any comments or questions for the applicant before we reopen the public hearing and let the public speak?
Well, I was going to ask John Kellard a couple of questions about the memo because I'm not sure I understand. So this is the updated December 3rd memo. And under general comments, number 4, it's talking about an existing drainage inlet grate. And I know we're not looking at stormwater. I think the second most serious issue here that we're not looking at after traffic is stormwater. But Mr. Keller, I'm not sure I understand relocating the inlet. There was an obstruction, which will now be in the sidewalk, but it's being left. I'm sorry, I just don't understand that.
Okay, let me try to clarify it for you. There's an existing drain inlet at that location, and it's not in great shape right now. The applicant is proposing a sidewalk within that area, from the handicap spots to a ramp that goes to the front door of the restaurant. They are proposing a handicap type ramp so that the inlet can stay within the sidewalk itself. Okay, I suggested they move the inlet to an area by the parking space instead of having it in the walk. And my suggestion was primarily because McDonald's isn't probably going to be very attentive in maintaining that inlet, and it may end up in the same shape it is now. And that was my only reason. And it was a suggestion, it's not a requirement. But the applicant prefers to leave the inlet at its present location. And they obviously will have to maintain it properly because it will be an access route for ADA access to the restaurant.
Okay, and it's not going to be impaired, the functioning of the inlet is not going to be impaired by the improvements made for ADA compliance?
No, I'm sure it'll work better because right now it's full with sediment. It's not even working.
And we would clean that out during construction, just as a matter of course. We're going to replace the grate with an ADA compliant grate so that you'd say it's traversable from an ADA perspective, but protocol for McDonald's when they do these renovations, if they're near an inlet, they usually pop open the lid and they clean it out to kind of maintain it so it's not, clogged up.
Okay, so that may lead into my second question, which is item number 7, talking about, perhaps the applicant can explain to us the maintenance schedule, update and repair site improvements, and I'm thinking maybe this inlet is part of what's referenced in that suggestion.
No, the inlet was separate. My comment there was primarily the remaining portion of the site. The McDonald's is improving the building. It's the building, the handicap spots adjacent to the building. But if you look at the remaining portion of the site, the parking lot, it's tired, it's in need of maintenance. I know it's not part of this application, but I thought the board may want to hear from the applicant on whether they do plan on making some additional improvements in the future, such as pavement repair. Possibly there's some islands in the parking lot that really are void of landscaping. Possibly landscaping those islands, possibly repairing or improving the curbing sidewalk in front of McDonald's or along the terrace in front of McDonald's, which is not part of this application.
And
Correct.
generally, those kinds of improvements would have to come back to the planning board if they were to, make the suggested improvements that you just outlined.
We may want Frank to comment on that issue. If it's replaced in kind, I don't necessarily know if they have to come back to the board. If they were just repairing pavement or sidewalk or patio area.
Or putting a tree in an island in the park, we're looking for more trees, I think.
Would be nice.
So I don't know if anybody can answer that question for me about what.
I don't, well, first of all, this is a site plan application, so we can comment about any part of the site. And we can, we have been focusing on the parts of the site that were being changed and not the parking lot and the islands on the parking lot. I think there was a whole period of time when previous planning boards concerned about vegetation and pervious surfaces required vegetation in islands. And if you drive around, not just the village of Amerenik, but a lot of places where that was done, they're all devoid of vegetation now. And a lot of them have been even paved over. I can speak to a couple on the post road that are east of that. So if that's something we want to address at this point in time and ask the applicant to fix up the parking lot and the walkways, there's nothing that's stopping us. If we approve this application as is and they decide to pave the parking lot, they're not going to come back to the planning board. As if I understand the code properly, and please Teresa or Frank step in here and tell me if I'm wrong on any of this.
John was correct. If it's replacing in kind, they wouldn't necessarily have to go back to the planning board. If they made changes, however, to islands and that type of thing, then they would, yes.
Am I,
One more quick question, sorry. Talking about the maintenance, let's go back to that, the other, the inlet that we were talking about that's going to be staying where it is now. There isn't normally some type of maintenance contract for taking care of that kind of inlet where it wouldn't be allowed to be filled with sediment. I can't imagine that a blocked inlet is doing anybody any good on the site or elsewhere. So there's no maintenance contract that's required of this kind of thing?
It's probably just under the code, it's probably just property maintenance. is if the town wanted to request the applicant to keep up the maintenance on that inlet, it would probably be a maintenance, property maintenance request through building, I would assume.
And there are other inlets on the, or anything similar to that, or is that sort of an unusual?
No, it's unusual because of its size. The other inlets in the parking lot are in the middle of the parking lot or over by the curb, and they're large grates, and they are maintained. They're clear. I looked in those inlets. They're fine shape. It's just this small inlet. It's just in an awkward place, and I guess nobody's ever wanted to deal with it. It looks like it's been there for years, filling up.
Okay,
But as long as they, as long as they repair that inlet and put the proper grade on it and maintain it, it'll be a fine location for access. It was just, as I mentioned, it was a suggestion on my part. That's all.
okay, great, thank you.
Any other member of the planning board have any other questions for? Okay. Okay, we can take down the screen share. And Teresa, guide me here to reopen the public hearing. Do we need a motion to reopen, or since we had left it open and just adjourned it, do we just, how do we handle it? You're muted.
You would think I would get used to this. I would just do a motion to reopen. That's
Okay.
fine.
Okay. Okay, I need a motion to reopen the public hearing for this application.
So moved.
One of you want a second?
It doesn't matter, your choice.
No, I can't do that.
I'll second.
Okay. All right, Ellen,
Yes.
Richard,
Yes.
Cindy,
Yes,
and I vote yes. Okay, the public hearing is reopened. If there's any member of the public who's present who would like to speak this application, please raise your hand so we can promote you to the panel. There wasn't anybody last time. Just that one letter we received. No? No one there? Brittany?
Nope.
No
No
one?
hands.
Okay. So like the last one, then I need a motion to close the public hearing.
so moved.
Second.
Second. Anybody?
Yes. Yes, I'll second.
Thank you. Okay. Cindy,
Yes,
Ellen,
Yes.
Richard,
Yes.
I also vote yes. Okay, so now we're to the point where do we want to direct our land use attorney to prepare a resolution? And if so, are there any conditions that we want to put in based on what was discussed tonight?
Tree in the drain.
The tree and the drain. What about the rest of the site? You want to just,
well,
that once the building looks so spiffy, they're gonna have to spruce up the rest of the site?
well, I guess that's my question. If those, we can't make them conditions for what they're doing to the building, I don't imagine. We make them strong suggestions. I don't know what our authority is here.
Your authority is in reviewing the application that you have in front of you. You can certainly request that the applicant provide the planning board with a schedule for maintenance of the stormwater facilities on the site, including the inlet. So if there's not currently a maintenance agreement on file, with respect to the stormwater. That's perfectly reasonable ask to make, Ms. Goldstein. I do believe you also need to clarify if you want one additional tree along the hedgerow. And if you can let me know that, I can clarify that. I believe that Alex Lomi will be revising the plans to address John's concern. Is that correct, Alex?
Yes, the two outstanding comments in John's letter will be addressed.
Okay, so, and I would ask Miss Oakley, was there any other recommendation regarding landscaping? Or is the tree in the Boston Post Road, along with the two that are already shown, what you were looking for?
Yes, but the more trees, the better, is my opinion. The only problem with adding them to the parking lot, I know that this renovation will reduce the parking by one spot. And by adding islands, it may reduce them more.
Yeah, and
They have to be reconfigured.
And I think I'm sorry, we should note that that Ms. Oakley also noted that the cultivar was incorrectly labeled, and so there needs to be some corrections made to the landscape plan.
Yeah, which we will do. Yep.
And the proposed tree should be included on other sheets as well. That's noted in her memo.
Sure.
So, okay, so, we could put some language in about at least one tree by the hedgerows, depending on underground utilities and overhead wires. If they can fit two in, woohoo, let's get two.
Right.
Yeah, I definitely,
already,
I'm sorry.
so I think they're already proposing two new trees in the one area, correct? So we don't want to go backwards, so it's 3 new trees. Okay.
I was thinking 4.
4.
But 4 is a nice round, even number.
I'd also like to see some language about, a scheduled maintenance, because again, we know stormwater is a problem. Let's
Right.
do what we can.
We can certainly provide some sort of regularly scheduled maintenance for the stormwater inlets on site. I don't think that's an issue. We can work with the McDonald's and the operator to have something formalized to say we'll do it every so often, whatever every 3 months, 6 months, whenever that deems necessary.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so it sounds like we're directing the land use attorney to prepare a resolution for the next meeting to approve with the conditions, approve the application with the conditions.
Can I just ask one more question? Did
Go
we
right.
end up with 3 trees or 4 trees?
Well, the 2 that's already on the plans.
Yep.
And at least 1
Okay,
the hedgerow, 2 if they can fit it based on the underground findings and overhead wires.
Absolutely.
Should we say 3 to
Utilities, I think Mr. Lomai said. And
Yeah, should we say 3 to 4? Should we put it in the resolution, say 3 to 4 pending, overhead wires?
Right.
Or 5.
Just make it 10.
Well, you're not cutting anything. So
all right.
we are trying to add to the tree here in the village of Mamaroneck as best we can, especially along the post road. There's not a lot of greenery, especially in that area there.
I have one question. It might be a silly question. I
No
expect
silly questions.
I expect the answer to be no, but if preferred by the board, if we can't get 4 trees, if we can only get 3 or 2, let's say, is there a fund that McDonald's could potentially contribute to for trees throughout the rest of the village? I'm just looking for other options.
There could be a fund, and you're certainly welcome to make a donation to the village.
Okay.
There isn't an official fund right now, but there is discussion about creating one.
Can I propose a language to say, you know, two trees we know we can do, right, Alex? And then to the extent that the removal of hedges would allow for additional trees, up to 4 trees along Boston Post Road would be strongly recommended. And maybe I can work with your land use attorney just on that language. So, you know, we want to put as many as we can in, but we don't want to, you know, not comply either if we can't.
Right, that's fine. The lawyers do the wordsmithing. Fine with me. Okay, all right, everybody good on all of this?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and I'm looking forward to the ribbon cutting. All right, we'll see you at the next meeting for Christmas. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, this brings us to the next item on the agenda, which is 1043 West Boston Post Road, just up the road from McDonald's. So I know we probably have a whole bunch of people here for this application. We usually do. This is our proposed chopped restaurant. And the last time they were here, we had some open issues with regards to traffic and pedestrian safety and landscaping. So let's see where we stand with the update of that application. So Brittany, whoever's raising, if you're a part of the team, please raise your hand so we can get you all on here. And again, this is a proposal, this is a site plan application for a proposal for a restaurant in the old bank building next to the gym.
Good evening, Chair, members of Planning Board.
Good evening, Mr. Spatz.
While everyone's being elevated, it just reminds me of like the Brady Bunch. We're just going to jump in the van and, you know, put the whole team together and drive on over and do this presentation. I think, let's see, we have Ralph, we have Brian, Justin, Andrew Lung. Is Andrew Lung joining us?
He's here.
Oh, there, at that time, I'm sorry. He's joining us. Andrew's on. Okay, so Chair, I have easy lifting this evening. I'm going to defer to my colleague, Kristen Wilson, as she has been working ever so recently diligently with our clients to address actually all those issues that you raised with regards to traffic trees. So I'm actually going to throw it over to Ms. Wilson.
Thank you, Andy. We are here this evening with our traffic engineer, our landscaping consultant, our site engineer, our clients, and Andy and I we believe we've addressed everything that your board and your consultants have raised. So I think you will be very satisfied. We hope you are very satisfied at the end of our presentation to hopefully move us forward and grant approval, maybe with some conditions similar to actually what we just heard with McDonald's with respect to trees, if we can plant them, and some other maybe more site-specific issues. But tonight we are here to really address the landscaping issues, the DOT traffic and pedestrian safety issues, and stormwater matters. So without further ado, I would like to hand this over to Andrew Tung to address the landscaping issues, our compliance with your new law under chapter 318 8G, and how we think we can best comply. But if we can't, we would likely look for some conditional language similar to that which Darius just asked with respect to McDonald's. And then we'll go through the traffic issues with Brian, and Ralph will summarize all of the stormwater and utility questions that have been raised.
Before Mr. Tung begins, the actual requirement of our code, the new requirement of our code to submit a what's called a tree, and described in the code, a tree preservation plan, that has not been put together and submitted, is that correct? I saw some preliminary numbers of removing 6 trees, what replacement trees you would need, but you as the applicant have not submitted that report. Is that correct?
Actually, we have, Madam
have.
Chair.
Oh, okay. Recently or?
No, it was
No.
submitted with the package.
It was submitted with the package? Okay.
November 24th package that was submitted, it was included in that.
All right, I'll have to-
Andy, do you have it or you want me
A
to? show
separate
it?
report or as part of the landscape plans?
I do. We actually, good evening, Madam Chair. I can describe that if you'd like. Andrew Tung. We had actually, in our earlier submission, shown the tree protection measures required under the new law as part of the landscape plan. We've now separated them into 2 drawings that were included in the package that Ralph described. And I'll just share my screen if I may.
Okay, we're talking about not tree protection, but tree preservation. Basically, the fact that you're removing 6 trees and you'd have to replace them. That's
Yes.
part of this, right? Okay.
Yeah, the tree, the first drawing here is the tree preservation plan, which shows that the tree protection measures at the top left corner
Right, those
and
are,
the details for those.
okay, those are different. We're 2 different things. Protection and preservation are 2 different things. You're talking about tree protection,
Yes.
right?
Well,
Okay.
it's
Issues with your tree protection.
okay. Then the tree,
Preservation. It's the tree removal and replacement part of this that's the most important part.
okay. So we are, as have been described, removing 6 existing trees within the parking lot on the left side of the drive coming in. There are, using the formula that's in the new law, there would be 10 replacement trees required.
Mhm.
What we had done in this.
Okay, where in your application is that calculation?
Well, from our reading of the tree law, the planning board, unlike the building department, is not required to use that calculation in its review of a site plan, because a tree permit per se is not required if you're under site plan review. So, but we have looked at that in terms of the 10 trees as were noted in the AKRF memo, that calculation. And what we've done in the site plan that we've submitted is to add, we had previously 3 trees, and let me actually jump to this plan where I've highlighted the trees in green. We started with the 3 trees at the front of the site. We've added a 4th tree behind the building, as was suggested in Tarabella's memo from November. Now, this particular site, if you were to calculate 10 trees, it's limited both in size and in possible locations for trees. We could potentially add another tree on either side of the parking at the back. That would come back up to 6. But if we were to try to squeeze in trees in other locations, and I'm happy to review this with Ms. Oakley, but it seems because of the narrowness of the spaces and the existing trees along the boundary, they wouldn't be in the best position. So that if there was a provision for the applicant to donate those 4 additional trees to the village for its use at some other location, we would certainly be willing to do that. But we're not sure that there's an appropriate spot to put them on this site.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. All right. Did anybody have any comments? Susan, do you have any comments with regards to adding the additional tree in the back and then possibly along the back boundary there?
I know that there's a lot of rock ledging, which will dictate whether or not trees can be planted. And I understand there was in one of the other consultants' memos, questions about whether this was the best location for the dumpster. So I'm not sure how that would affect a tree in the right rear. So I can make a site visit and get a better idea of where I think a potential location could be, but I know you can see how the grading on the east part of the site, the grading changes drastically. That's pretty much a rock ledge around that edge. And I believe it wraps around to the rear. Right, exactly.
It does, yes.
Exactly. So that presents a problem as far as, large.
Well,
planting.
so let me, if 4 trees is the maximum of what could possibly be planted, and you're willing to donate additional trees, would you be willing to donate the amount to bring it up to what the law would require you? And that would be 6 additional trees then. Would that be something that you would consider?
When you, sorry, Madam Chair, are you saying to donate, you're saying to give to the village to plant elsewhere?
Yes.
I think that's something our client would be willing to do if the site doesn't have the ability to safely plant trees.
Okay, it's just something that's come up. I mean, this again is a new law. You're actually the first application before the planning board where we've had to apply it. So we're feeling our way around.
Madam Chair, if I can just briefly, much like the last year that we've been going through the process, and I'll echo Ms. Wilson's sentiment, CHOP wants to make the village proud. And I know that we had discussions as late as this afternoon with regards to this possibility of donating trees to the municipality. And absolutely, we want to move this. We want to move this forward, but in the spirit of doing right by the village. So yes, this is something that we would absolutely be able to entertain. So we could sort of bring this to a close with regards to the tree component. And it's a learning curve because this is a new code and we're all learning to interpret and figure out how to implement this. So.
Wasn't there some conversation about exploring 1 or 2 more trees along the Boston Post Road in the front of the building? I don't know whatever happened to that.
Site-wide, Cindy, I mean, Ms. Goldstein, I'm sorry, Ms. Goldstein, I think, and I know Mr. Tung can expand upon that. I think there was some concern in terms of how during the spring and summer, if it becomes fully, the site visuals right, left, that could be problematic for safety. But again, I don't want to speak out of turn. That's why Mr. Tung is here. But no, you're right. We did discuss locations.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that that's still, it's either under consideration or it's been disposed of.
I believe, not that it's a tree, but I believe there's landscaping screening provided in front. It's gonna, right now, as you know, if you look at it, I mean, it's a, you barely have grass up front, but it's going to be very nicely landscaped. And it's going to actually have a positive optic effect and experience for people driving by. So I think that's something, again, it's not a tree, but landscaping wise.
So maybe Mr. Tung or Ms. Oakley can address whether or not trees would be appropriate in the front of the building.
I can certainly do that. Let me bring that back up. There's 2 issues. We had proposed 1 tree either side along the side property lines, flanking the driveways. One issue has to do with sight to the building. The building is set back from the street. And so to plant trees in the center would obscure the view to the building, which may provide for confusion and make it more difficult to see. The other issue is as you exit the outbound driveway and look back this way, potentially the tree would block some of your view looking down the post road.
Looking south.
Looking south, yes. So for those 2 reasons, we planted lower growing material along the center of the property adjoining the patio. There's a layered shrub planting with a perennial bed in front of that.
So Ms. Oakley, what do you agree with that? Or is there a type of tree that you could put one or so in the front, one or two of a certain, is there a type of tree that would be, wouldn't obstruct anybody's vision and could work there?
Given that the structure is raised above the post road, that once you start planting a tree that has a tree form, the canopy of it will even block sightlines even more because of where the cars are driving out. This is a common issue with building owners, store owners, that they don't want their facade blocked. I think you also have to keep in mind that the existing plant material that is on the Equinox parking lot site and also to the east, there are a number of trees already there. So especially with them adding more trees where they are, I think they're limited to the left and the right without blocking the facade of the building. So, I mean, I would be interested to see if there's any places to the rear that we could put some plant material.
Ms. Oakley, just so we are crystal clear, I think you're referring to the northeast quadrant where Mr. Tong made reference to before. That's sort of where the rock ledge meets in the corner. Mr. Tong, if you could just focus, yeah, right there, perfect. That's where you're thinking.
No, I'm thinking the rear of the property along that boundary.
Okay, that's all rock ledge though. That, I mean, again, I'm hardly a landscape.
No, that is a rock ledge,
That's
Andrew. It's about a 4 or 5 foot grade change between the curb and the property line here. And it's a vertical, almost vertical rock ledge.
In the rear though.
Yeah, I'm talking about the rear. The area that Andy is pointing to right now is also rock ledge with a near vertical slope on it.
Okay, that's what I thought. So
It's tough.
yeah, it's a problematic site for deep tree roots.
Okay, all right, I think that we've.
But to get back to your question, Madam Chair, absolutely. That's something that we would seriously
Do
consider.
what we can. Let's say at this point in time, the applicant will do what they can on the property. Right now, we're talking about 4 trees. And you will basically explore willingness, or it seems like you're willing to donate the funds for 6 trees to be planted somewhere else in the village. At the village's discretion. Okay, just like McDonald's. So, okay, can we move?
That was the word I was thinking of, canopy. Thank you, Ms. Oakley. I was reaching back here. I couldn't figure out the word, but thank you.
Okay, do you want to do engineering next? Or you said you wanted to do pedestrian, the pedestrian
I
issues?
think Brian Dempsey's with us this evening. He's had a lot of correspondence with the DOT.
Yes,
Certainly
yes.
address any other pedestrian safety issues.
We saw their letter, yes.
Hey. Good evening, Brian Dempsey from the firm DTS Provident Design Engineering. Just prior to the last meeting, Member Goldstein, myself, and Elaine and Ashley from AKRF met with Ann DeRilius, who's the permit coordinator for the New York State DOT. Member Goldstein mentioned her concerns, including students crossing mid-block on the post road, coming from the high school, going towards McDonald's and such. So based on that, the DOT requested that we prepare a pedestrian safety study and do updated traffic counts. Since when we started this, we were in the middle of COVID, so there were different volumes there. Thus, we did do a pedestrian safety study, and just a brief summary of it. There was at the, and can I share my screen?
You need to see the site plan, Brian? I can share it if you want.
No, it's all right.
There you are.
So this is a scenario of the area. So there is the existing crosswalk right here, coming from the front of the school, across, essentially opposite the motel there. And during the peak period of which was the lunch period, which was 10:50 something to about 11:50 something, give or take a few minutes. So during that hour, we ended up counting 422 people crossing at the at the crosswalk. Now that's total combination both ways. So essentially, say 211 crossed from the school over, and those same 211 crossed back. What Member Goldstein's concern was students crossing in this area here, mainly heading towards the deli and burger place here, as well as McDonald's, which is just to the south of here. There was about 169 we counted. So about 85 in each direction. And there was also an additional 446 students who walked back and forth along here that did not cross. So walked either to Starbucks here or towards McDonald's or one of the other places in that area. So that would be about 223 students there. So altogether, you had close to 400 or so more than 400 students crossing or either coming up the post road and going to some of the facilities over in this area. So we did do the safety study. The DOT has reviewed it, as has AKRF, and we'll get to their comments in a minute. Just the DOT this is the quickest review we've ever been able to have them do. They understood the concerns because they are very, very backlogged right now. But they knew the issues here, so they wanted to move this as long as possible. We did get the letter last night. So, and it was even after hours last night when we got it. They had 3 comments about the application. The first one is they just need 2 other phases of the form filled out, which we are doing. Usually they don't require them for an expedited review that this is because of the size of this review. They have a comment, and some of this is site plan related. They suggest possibly to look at tightening the driveway. We're going to talk to them about doing it with striping, just to narrow the driveway so that only one car would be coming out at the same time. So in case one was going left, one was going right, you keep it as one car coming out at a time, which will make it easier for pedestrians when they're crossing in front of the driveway. And there was one part of the sidewalk that is a little chopped up, and that will be repaired as part of the project here. That's in front of the site there. They had 3 other comments regarding the pedestrian safety study itself. And most of these are more village or school related. And we're responding to the DOT, and we have talked to them about that. And the reason being is they would need village law to change or village funds in terms of maintaining and such with it. The first one was adding ADA compliant detectable warnings to the crosswalk in front of the school. There has been one recently added in front of the school, but it was only placed on the school side. There was not one put on in front of the motel. Part of the concern there is because the crosswalk basically goes up to where the driveway is on the motel. And so whether that detectable warning would get cracked or not, if cars are driving over that. But that's something we can work with the village engineer on in terms of having a detectable warning put on there. And those are the little pads that have the little bumps to signal for an ADA person to notice that there is a crosswalk there. The second one, and this goes to Member Goldstein's concern about the crossings on the post road. The DOT stated it's a legal crosswalk, a legal crossing. There's no striped crosswalk, so no marked crosswalk, but since the school driveway is there by state law, it is a legal crossing. So to be able to enforce or prohibit crossing there, the village would have to pass a code to say no crossing in this area, and would have to install signage prohibiting the crossing there. And that way it could be enforced by the police. But that's a village issue, and it's something, the village would have to decide would they do it, whether chop wood in or not. We'll leave that up to the village on that. I am on the Westchester County Traffic Safety Board. The village police chief became a new member of that board today. And, we can talk to her about that also. The third item was that AKRF had mentioned about adding a flashing beacon to the signs that to the school signs. This again would be a village issue about adding there, because you would need to run electricity to them or run some form of solar facility. And the state would require a permit from the village to do that, and that the village would be required to maintain that. Also on this, I don't know if these signs are still here, but those should be removed, the two advertising signs on this pole here. But it would be on this side and on the other, in the opposite direction. But that again would have to come from the village to the state in terms of a permit and such to do that. In regards to AKRF's letters from last week, and this was before the state comments were distributed, they asked us just to provide information at the hearing on a couple issues. One was enforcement observations, noting whether police vehicles were present or active during the study. There may have been some police vehicles who did drive by. The people doing the counts did not mark whether it was a police vehicle or not, but there could have been. There were no cars pulled over or anything during the count, so there was no enforcement in that regard. But and the other thing is there is a crossing guard at the crosswalk during lunchtime to assist the kids in crossing, in addition to the traffic signal and the pedestrian signal there. There is a crossing guard present. The second comment they said was description of the pedestrian crossing methods. So I touched on some of this before. They crossed at the crosswalk in large groups. And the busiest time was the first 15 minutes, and then it's further distributed. And when the kids return, it's further distributed. Some come to the pizza place, grab their thing and just go. Some hang out there, eat at the deli and the pizza place. Crossing in mid-block in the Post Road in this section, they said the kids did it pretty well for a mid-block crossing. It was in smaller groups, about 3 to 7 people per group. They would cross when people would be crossing here. They would time it at the same time. And there was limited traffic coming in the other direction at that point, or the traffic was slowed up because these cars on the Post Road going northbound were stopped at the red light. So the cars here were going slower. So there were no close calls or anything there. But AKRF asked us to report about that. Other suggestions they had for consideration for CHOP was providing a delivery program that delivers batches of meals over to the high school at the beginning of the lunch period. That's something CHOP could consider and talk with the school about. The issue there is, would the school permit it? And, would there be a place on campus where the vehicle could go and such? And that's something that they can talk to the school about. The other thing was offering reduced price or free delivery to the school. Again, it would be an issue with the school whether they would want delivery vehicles coming over onto their property during lunchtime. Those are the traffic items. If you have any questions.
I'm wondering whatever happened with the potential of limiting turns out of the building and prohibiting left-hand turns.
They were not leaning towards that because of the issues we had talked about in terms of if someone does come out of Chopped here who had wanted to make a left and it's prohibited, they end up coming into the deli parking here and making a U-turn because there's no parking restriction there, and or they come to the school and they turn around in the school and they come out that way, and you really don't want them going into the school.
Well, you actually can't drive in front of the school there. You'd have to go in.
All right. So I didn't have the whole area. They would then loop around. And
that's a complicated maneuver.
Actually, Brian, if I can, there is a nail salon right by the crosswalk where you turn in and turn out. That is, and I can't tell you how many times I've almost been hit myself jogging by there because it's wall. They have a mirror. That is also something that probably would be happening, is you'd have more use of people driving in, turning around and going back out. And that in itself is that's why I'm kind of speaking out of turn here. Because when I run, I stop, I have peek my head around that little exit from the nail salon.
Well, I know that Trader Joe's on the other side of the road and further south, they have somewhat recently prohibited left-hand turns out of that shopping center. So there must be some benefit to it. I understand there's still going to be people who are going to, do what they're not supposed to do. I just, from a traffic point of view, and maybe KRF can help me on this, understand if there's any benefit to that, at least during peak hours.
Ryan, can you go down a little bit further?
All right, so coming from Trader Joe's, and my wife has celiac, so Trader Joe's has very good gluten-free stuff. So we're there often. What happens to Trader Joe's, and I've done it, and I've sat there and watched when she shop, I'd watch what happens. And as I said, I do is you come out here, you turn into the bank, you turn around, and then you head out that way. So it's not really solving the issue. Where the type of system like this is effective is if when you have a roundabout or something at another location where it's appropriate to be able to turn around easier. But and I did talk further with the DOT about this. It is something they said they can monitor with the village. And to, it's something that they can always put in at a later date. And what they would do would look at, say, not only CHOP, but all the other properties in the stretch here, because none of these have left turn restrictions. So, you'll have more cars coming out of Equinox than coming out of CHOP. And, they'll look at whether somewhere down the line, whether they need to do parking restrictions, turning restrictions at all the various locations. They will work with the village on that. It's more of a core thing. The other thing we were asked to look at was the accidents. In terms of pedestrian accidents, there are only 3 recorded pedestrian accidents in this area. And none of them were school related. One was a person turning off Old Post Road, hit 2 people crossing here. The driver said it was a glare issue and she did not see the 2 people crossing. The other 2, one was crossing the McDonald's driveway here, wasn't going into McDonald's, was crossing, but somebody was turning, and I forget if it was turning right or left in, but hit the person crossing. And the third one was within the McDonald's parking lot somewhere, where a pedestrian was hit. So they weren't school related. There were none in this area of pedestrian accidents, but it is something that the state said they can talk to the village and work with the village on that in terms of the enforcement. And if the village chooses to go with the signage, and they would have to put it in their code so that it's enforceable. That's something they would work with. So they did listen to you.
Aaron from AKRF, do you have any comments on this? We do have your colleague's memo.
Yep, this is Aaron from AKRF. So Ashley, Brian summarized Ashley's latest memo pretty well. I wasn't on that call with Elaine and Ashley and Brian and Ms. Goldstein, but it sounds like the left turn lane or the left turn restriction was that brought up at the meeting at all?
Yes, it was.
DOT doesn't think it's warranted at this point.
At this point, because of the limited amount who would be turning left, and also if they turn right, then they're headed back to the crosswalk where the students are crossing, and that there's no clean place to turn around.
Right. I mean, I think we would defer to them on that just because it's part of the Perm 33 process. And if they're not thinking it's something that's needed, we wouldn't, intervene on that. My understanding from Elaine was that it was something that DOT did not think was necessary.
Okay.
And that's fine. I mean, we're only looking at this right now during the 1-hour lunch period where the heaviest volume of customers will be leaving the school. I mean, kids have free periods all day long and staff has free periods here and there. And, there are always people running across there. I guess I'm feeling that the suggestions, while helpful, still are a little anemic in terms of the ADA compliant detectable warnings and signage. I'm really happy there's been no collisions with pedestrians, but that doesn't mean there won't be. And I think 28% of pedestrians crossing in a 1-hour period is something to be concerned about. I'm not sure. I'd like to know that we've done everything we can to
And-
protect pedestrian safety and pedestrians from their own poor choices.
And if the village, as I said, the DOT feels it's because of state law, that it is a legal crossing, so if the village wants to proceed, on a different route with the, putting it into the code of no crossing there, it's not related to CHOP, it's a current issue of people crossing there. But they would have to post a sign on each side. No crossing here, please use crosswalk.
Well, I guess I understand it's not CHOP's responsibility. I think it is related to CHOP insofar as we have something very attractive on the opposite side of the street, and that's going to encourage kids to cross at that point where, they're not going to Equinox or they weren't going to the bank. So I think we're making it more attractive to just come out those doors of the school and walk across the street, because that's the closest way to get to their destination. So I guess, the delivery program may or may not work based on what the school wants to do. And I guess nobody's reached out to the school administration to see if that's a possibility.
Not yet, no.
Okay.
But as I said, if the village passes the law on the no crossing, then the police can enforce it, and and we can talk to the police. I mean, it's more efficient if the board talks to the police, or through the mayor. However you see fit to do that, but that would, in terms of increasing enforcement, but they can, based upon discussions with the state, they can enforce the crossing there because it's officially a legal crossing. Not a wise crossing, a legal crossing.
I understand.
So Brian, were you planning to respond in writing to these questions about the additional qualitative observations that you summarized? I think it might be, just so there's a record and Elaine and Ashley can follow up about that.
Yes, we're gonna, the letter came in last night from DOT, so we are putting together a response to that, and I talked to Elaine and Ashley about response to their letter, and we can put both of them in writing.
Okay, thank you.
And anything we send to the state, we send to the village also.
Great, thanks.
Anybody else have anything you want to add about the pedestrian safety? This is a major issue. I'm not sure we can find a suitable solution.
Madam Chair, what I would suggest with regards, and on behalf of the applicant, with regards to the traffic, I would suggest that obviously any of the requirements or recommendations that were provided by the DOT that's within the control of CHOP, for example, obviously we can't post signs on a public roadway without code and going through the process of being adopted by the village. But whatever we can do within our range, we would certainly do. There are organizations like Safe Route to Schools. There are other entities that are involved that work with businesses and schools alike to assure and make recommendations for future best practice. Hold on a second. I'm choking here. Hold on 1 second.
Yeah, we don't want you to choke.
In any event, so I think that what we would press is to adopt whatever we can handle and do, and keep the door open for future recommendations and suggestions, because again, it's not just a CHOP issue. There are other establishments that are opening up next to us, and we would work collectively with our neighbors. So I think it's a good start, but we certainly wouldn't want this to sort of stall out the process moving forward. I'm sorry for like crying here, but my apologies.
And Chair, as I said, I'm a member of the County Traffic Safety Board, as now as the police chief. I've also done the Safe Routes to School studies for the village on behalf of the schools and the village previously, and we did on behalf of the village study the 3 elementary schools in the past also. So we can try to assist in those manners.
Okay, we'll have to figure out, the planning board should probably make, I don't know, we'll have to figure out how the planning board can move this forward to the traffic. We have a traffic commission who then makes traffic recommendations to the board of trustees. I'll have to look and see who's on the traffic commission. And,
Now, obviously, any resolution that is granted on future suggestions or recommendations by the village. So we're open to future suggestions and recommendations. I guess my point is to have to go to the traffic committee now would really put us in a bad situation.
no, I understand. I'm talking about.
Okay.
We're talking about more longer term.
Which I agree. We all can agree on
that's,
this. We all can agree to that. Safety is paramount.
Some of us are old enough to remember a dear friend whose daughter was struck by a car crossing
On Palmer Avenue, yep.
on Palmer Avenue. So as we channel him, since he was the chairperson of the planning board for many years, and an honored member of the land use boards, as we do this, we think of.
I agree with you. I hear you.
Yeah. Good friend of ours. Yeah. Okay. Let's move on to engineering. We have an updated memo from Kellogg Sessions dated December 3rd that I hope you have seen.
Yes, Ralph Perigine from BTS Providence.
Ralph, just before you jump in there, Madam Chair, if we can, with regards to traffic, other than what we discussed, is there anything that we on our end need to provide you that, or I know there's some questions going forward, but is there anything that Brian hasn't provided tonight that you would want to see in the immediate future to assist?
Well, I think that the question came up, has anybody spoken to anybody over at the school to see if they'd be amenable to deliveries or something?
Well, I'll say this, Chair, that I personally tried to deliver lunch to my son recently, and they wouldn't even let me on campus because of
Well,
COVID
you
provisions.
were kind
And
of, suspicious.
you know, hey, that lunchbox, but listen, it was.
I mean, we're not
excellent lunch for me.
talking, I mean, we're maybe not talking about somebody entering the building, but, something outside where the kids could come out and pick up, if they're ordering on an app and prepaying and just picking up, right? Isn't that how this all works? There could be some place outside the school building where they could come outside to a vehicle, they have their, confirmation number, however you work that, and pick up on that side of the street as opposed to crossing over and entering the restaurant. It might behoove you to make a phone call to
We will definitely do that, Chair.
the
Absolutely.
school to just see if they're even amenable to a discussion about it. If they shut you down right away, then that's the answer to that question. If they say, oh yeah, we'll chat it, we can continue, then it gives us more information.
I guess I'm also looking for, I mean, I've heard the verbal response to the no left-hand turn, and on some level, I completely understand that, but I don't see DOT or AKRF or Mr. Dempsey saying definitively that no left-hand turn, that prohibition won't help and could cause other issues. I like that for the record. Some kind of opinion from a professional, preferably all the professionals weighing in on that.
Yeah, I'm surprised the DOT didn't, if you discussed it at the meeting, they didn't mention it at all, but, we thank them for their expedited review.
Right, we definitely discussed it, and that's in their purview. We have really not a lot to say about
Right.
that.
Right, but I'll have them put something in writing, and I will put something in writing also, and I can't speak for AKRF, but we will.
I could circle back with Elaine and see if they can get something in writing about that too.
Yeah, and just a few sentences, but I just don't want it to say that no, prohibiting left-hand turns won't help, period. That's not what I'm looking for. I want a little bit more rationale.
Understood.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
As somebody who needs to make a left-hand turn out of Trader Joe's.
On the issue of the school,
The issue.
with talking to the school, I'm wondering if is there any, maybe I don't know if this is already brought up. I haven't been involved in this project, but there's a crossing guard already at the crosswalk. You're saying on a daily basis. Has the school have they done anything internally about just letting the students know they should use the crosswalk and not cross mid-block? And it's the crossing guard. I know we're dealing with teenagers in high school, right? But
they're high school students.
Aaron, call my kids. I'm gonna give you the phone number right now. Call them, please.
Yeah.
Just throw it out.
They're kids. Talk to them till they're blue in the face. They're kids. Okay. Can we?
Sorry, Ralph.
Hearing. Okay, Mr. Perugini.
Perugine, yes.
Perugini.
So I did receive Mr. Keller's comments and I have reviewed them. There's just a couple of minor, and I would say they're relatively easy to address. One of them is the note on the landscape lighting plan to provide a note to the effect that the 2 foot, nothing should be within the 2 foot overhang of the curb. We can add that relatively easily. The note, and then a couple of notes on drawing C101 and 100, which it's just a cross-reference to the existing detail, the proposed details. The other comment that John and I spoke about earlier this afternoon about item 3, where he is requesting an isolation unit to accommodate pre-treatment requirements. We have conceptually discussed that, and we have a solution, I believe, and it's a technical solution. But it's not really too difficult to address, and we would be happy to make it a condition of approval if that's the case. And I believe Mr. Keller was in agreement with that. And I mean, it's relatively minor, as I said. Those are the last 3 comments. We've satisfied all the other comments in Mr. Keller's memo on the submission that we had made.
John, do you have to add to that?
That's correct. I spoke with Ralph today. We're down to a few minor comments on the drawings and resolving the pre-treatment provision in the stormwater regs, which I believe, I agree with Ralph, we have a solution for it. He just has to detail it on the plans.
John, you want to describe what the solution is?
It's pre-treatment. It's providing pre-treatment for the stormwater to the new infiltration units that are being proposed. Rather than using the existing dry wells to treat the additional runoff, Ralph designed an additional system on the site to treat the stormwater. And we just want to pre-treat the water before it goes into that system.
Okay. Any?
I don't know if you want me to share the drawings at all, but I'm sorry, Ms. Chair.
Does anybody, let me put it to the board. We've been kind of going through all of this stuff. Does anybody want to see the drawings, or I mean, if we're down to minor, I'm sorry, it's getting late. Minor points on this. Anybody from the planning board have any additional comments or concerns with engineering or anything else that we've spoken about?
Madam Chair, I'm going to ask for a point of clarification. There was some reference during our last meeting, very brief. Someone made reference to the stormwater management agreement. I will reach out to Frank tomorrow and see if that would actually be applicable here. But I certainly did not want this to come up at a later date and delay our forward motion here.
Andrew, let me just intervene for a second. It is Mr. Keller, in his memo under item 8, said it's a condition of the certificate of occupancy, not for condition of site plan approval is, and I can read that directly if you want. Prior to the issuance of certificate of occupancy, the applicant shall provide a maintenance schedule and procedures for all proposed stormwater management infrastructure. So that we would agree to do that as the certificate of occupancy.
Great.
Once you build it, then
They'll come.
falls under the building inspector, right, and the CO.
Right.
And there's a
Yes.
standard form that the village uses
Right.
for the agreement.
Right.
I just didn't want to leave any stone unturned.
Okay. All right. Where's my planning board members? There's so many people on the screen. Anybody have
You're
any?
multiplying.
Yeah, I know, I'm trying to like eyeball everybody. I mean, how do we want to proceed now? Are we to the point where we can ask Teresa to draft a resolution with some conditions of approval for next time? Or do we want to hear back, you know, if somebody from the team can just take the temperature of the high school principal or whomever on the high school side would need to speak to that and get back to us. You know, we've got one more meeting this year at the end of December, and then we're back in the January. Do you have any?
I think we could prepare a draft of a resolution, and if the school saying yes or no to delivery doesn't really impact the actual resolution. I don't think. It would make life better, but I don't think it impacts the resolution directly.
I can draft it with the condition either way, Mr. Littman, and that way we can hear, you know, whether the high school is amenable to it.
Okay. I mean, I have no objection to the concept, so.
Yeah, and Ms. Oakley was going to just go check the rear of the property to see if there was any place that a tree could be planted. So we have that as an open issue. And the engineering, we have that one open issue that I think it sounds like it's a condition of approval that would go into the resolution. So.
Well, I'm only a little concerned going back to the pedestrian situation, which I will beat as a dead horse forever. So yes, I mean, I think that's a good plan for speaking to the school to find out what they will or won't allow. That's excellent. But regardless of what they say, it seems like any kind of disaster averting action needs to be taken by the Village of Mamaroneck. And I don't know how we get this on the agenda for the Traffic Commission, the Board of Trustees, the police chief. I've never seen this before, where really the bulk of the safety measures are the responsibility of the municipality. So how do we get that coordinated? Because I can see this slipping through, you know, our fingers in terms of making any kind of meaningful safety changes.
Well, the planning board can reach out to the chair. Yes, I was just reappointed. To the Traffic Commission. I mean, let me.
That's what I was going to suggest.
Yeah, let me do some, I got to find out who the chairperson is. I mean, if it were the two previous ones who I knew personally very well, I could just pick up the phone. I don't have any idea who the Traffic Commission chair is right now. But I'm more than happy to reach out to that person and describe what's going on and what the issues are, and see if we can get it on their agenda. And then if the village code has to be changed with regards to the legality of the crossing at the driveway, they would be the ones who would start that process with the Board of Trustees with our, you know, blessing. You know, we could both work with the Board of Trustees, but this would take time. This would take time. They meet once a month, I think, most months, as far as I know. I don't really follow their schedule. But if we were gonna hold up this application for this, that could be quite a period of time. So let's, I would suggest that we move forward and keep a couple of balls in the air and see what happens.
Is it helpful for you at all, Madam Chair, if the planning board took a vote to beg the traffic commission to move expeditiously on looking at this? I don't know if.
I mean, you could, but you know what? The traffic commission, in my experience, is really interested in doing good things, and if there's a traffic problem, they want to fix it. So I like I said, I don't know who's on the traffic commission right now, so I'd have to look out who's on it. But by nature, it tends to be people who are very concerned. They put up crosswalks and whatnot near the elementary schools in Rhinebeck and things like that. I mean, stop signs for the traffic like on Barry Avenue where there is no crossing guard and things like that. So they seem to be very, what's the word I'm looking, proactive about traffic issues, especially related to schools. But if we need something, we can do it at the next meeting. Let me take their temperature. How's that?
Madam Chair,
Works
and
for me.
members of planning board, I would plead and urge that we're able to arrive at a conclusion on December 22nd. And what I mean by this is I'm confident between Teresa, myself, and Kristen, we could wordsmith a resolution which is indicative of the importance of maintaining safety in our community. So in the future, should the traffic committee or safe route to schools and whomever come up with recommendations, these are things that can be applied and explored further. My concern, Chair and members of planning board, and again, I don't fault you. I don't fault where we're at this evening. But if this goes further into 2022, there will not be a CHOP. I'm saying that candidly. I'm saying that, and it's not a threat. I'm not one of these, and you know me well enough. I'm not an attorney that comes in to blow smoke and say, we don't get what we want, we're out of here. This is not the case. Where we're at.
So Andrew, can I just interrupt? I think that the chair was getting the temperature of the board so that they could decide to direct me to draft a resolution. So
Right. For the next meeting.
I think they just haven't heard from Ellen, perhaps.
No, it sounds like, and again, the planning board is still one member short. We still have a vacancy, was not filled by the Board of Trustees Monday. So it sounds like we're in agreement to wordsmith a resolution that reflects this conversation and where we are right now, and with a few little minor odds and ends that can be filled in at the next meeting. Yeah.
Okay, great, I will do that.
Okay. Is
Teresa,
everybody?
if I can, by the way, and I preface, I'm not blaming. I'm just saying that it's been a long road, and
Yes.
and it's been a process that we want to make the village proud. CHOP wants to make the village proud, and just if I can, my caveat is I'm not going to be here December 22nd. Kristen is going to be here, so you won't. And I just, if
So she
anything,
can
I can
celebrate
say,
a happy Christmas then.
I'll get there. I have 20 minutes before I'm just kidding. But the fact is, this has been something we've been carrying for a long time, and I
Yes,
appreciate.
we understand it. And the more you talk, the longer this meeting is getting. So keep it up, because we have one more discussion as a board, and we'd like to get to it. Is that fair? Thank you, Mr. Spatz. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Everybody good? Okay. Thank you, people. Have a good evening.
All right, so on for the 22nd. Everybody have a
The final
great.
item on the agenda.
We're done.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank Thank you, everyone. Have a great holiday. Be safe.
All right, thank you. Okay, we have an administrative item on the agenda, and members of the planning board, you should have received a memo from Ashley earlier today with regard to 715 Mamaroneck Avenue. I hope you all saw it. Okay. As everyone knows, they've applied for a permit to tear down, demolish an office building on 715 Mamaroneck Avenue and put up a residential apartment building. We've declared this as an unlisted action under secret, and have requested additional information from the applicant. The applicant has asked us for some more clarity with regards to what information we'd like to see from them. Ashley came up with a list now of 11 items. So I think that, I was a little concerned at this earlier process. Now, this isn't a official scoping session or anything. We haven't, decided how we're moving forward. We need this information to move forward. There may be other items that we consider besides this. I consider this an excellent start. This was just for the planning board then to just discuss and decide how we want to move forward. And I guess direct AKRF Ashley to, or I guess Teresa, since their attorney reached out to you to send them communication saying, well, here's a list. This is, I read this today. This was a pretty thorough list. First off is an analysis of consistency with the LWRP and the zoning code.
And the comprehensive plan too.
Oh, and yes, the comprehensive plan, can't forget that. And all of these are analysis of, so I'm not going to just repeat those two words, potential visual impacts, impact on natural resources, including trees, landscaping, tree replacement, and of course, the new code has to come in there.
I'd actually like to add something to that list, if it's appropriate. That's the area with an aquifer. That's a natural resource. I think there should be some analysis of that aquifer.
Okay. That also leads us, it's a good segue to number 4, which is the potential flooding impacts to the building.
Number 12, aquifer.
Well, and I think under that one, wouldn't we add some kind of analysis from first responders?
I think that, well, that would be part of the analysis of potential flooding impacts, wouldn't it?
Well, I think they're talking about damage to people and property, flooding impacts, as opposed to emergency response to flooding. I see it as a chain of events.
So it'd be including the emergency response.
It would be an impact on emergency response services and their capacity to respond.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Well, and also, right, their capacity to respond not just to this building, but their overall capacity during a flood event, because lots of people are impacted,
Right.
But also what specifically happens to these folks.
Right. Well, during Ida, people in the buildings along in this region were left in place. They were not evacuated. They were told to stay in their apartments.
Well, unless they had
Without
a queue.
electricity and without services, and hopefully they had enough food and what they needed to do that. Okay, all right, that's good. Let's do these one at a time. If anybody has anything to add to them, we will. Okay, so that was number 4. Number 5 is the potential for this project to increase flooding on adjacent and downstream properties. Anybody? 6, the stormwater management, obviously. 7, some alternatives for the layout, including a layout that reduces the proposed amount of impervious surface. 8, transportation, mobility, parking analysis, pedestrian, bicycle infrastructure, anticipated parking demand versus supply, traffic circulation and site access. 9, impacts on the county sanitary sewer system. 10, consideration of green infrastructure and green building technologies. I do believe that's in the code. This must be in the commercial district. I think they have to have some green technology. What a lot of these buildings are putting on are green roofs, but they're also putting in, for the changeover to electric vehicles, they're putting in electricity.
Charging stations.
Right. The only problem here is that we can't put any infrastructure on the flood code in the lower floor because it'll flood. So if you're going to park your cars there, I don't know how, unless they put them in the ceilings high enough and bring them,
You know, a really long cord.
a really long cord, right? That's going to be an issue. So how are they going to deal with the coming electrification of our vehicles? How are we all going to deal with that? That's what I'm trying to figure out. And then analysis of potential impacts to historic or archaeological resources. This is pretty much a, you know, thorough list of generic secret topics.
What about overall waste disposal? I know we're talking about sanitary sewer system, but what about just trash and recycling?
The impact on village services.
I mean, incrementally, I don't know, or how are they going to handle it so that, especially when it's in a floodplain?
There has to be some place where, I mean, look what happens with the regatta, frankly, you know, there's always like couches and things out at the curb as you go around the corner there. There has to be some way to deal with the waste. But if we want to impact on municipal services in addition to emergency responders during flood, I'm not sure this building is that big to have an impact unless that is their conclusion. Same thing with the school system. You know, the Mamaroneck Avenue School was pretty overcrowded. There's already been some increases in the Mamaroneck School District. This would be in the Mamaroneck School District. That's one thing we have that's not on this list, is the impact on the school district. So they need to just quantify that, you know, if they're saying they're not anticipating any school-age children moving into the building, they're marketing to commuters because it's so close to the train station, whatever, you know.
Oh, what about MDL, multiple dwellings law? I think we should specify that in the list of things.
Is that part of secret? Well, that's part of the zoning.
It's zoning.
It's zoning, including the MDL, which we got that nice memo from
the zoning board.
Well, we got a request from the zoning board, but
oh yes,
we did get an answer that the MDL applies. Right. So that would be a number 1, the zoning code, that would be including the MDL, not just section or chapter 342.
Kathy,
So
I wanted to,
Wait a minute.
I'm sorry.
Oh, no, I was just saying so in going back to review the application for this, I noticed there was no backup online anywhere. I don't know if I just wasn't seeing it, but didn't seem to be anywhere. I think it relates to this. I think it relates to the task underway because we want to look at the application and see what might be missing, or, you know, whether all the processes have been completed, you know, in order to even start our processes. But I don't see the paper, I don't see the application and the materials anywhere.
I'm sorry, Ellen, they weren't there for tonight's meeting because we've gotten them previously for a previous meeting. They were available to the planning board previously.
When this was on the agenda, I remember they were available.
Right. So do you download those to your computer or do you access them online?
I do, you know, I've done both in the past, but I don't have those materials. So that just concerned me a bit in this exercise, and we're going to see what else we need. You know, I'm not sure what we have I wasn't able to review what we have on hand so far. So I was a little concerned about that.
Yeah, well, I think, frankly, we had very little with regards to SQL, which is why we asked them for more information. And this is such a comprehensive list, at least in my opinion, although we may think of something later on. But there is a way that you can log on to the village's file management system, which is called Novus, and see all of the paperwork for this application, regardless of what it was received for. We didn't post it. One, this was a very late addition to the agenda. I didn't get it added till Monday or actually Tuesday.
Right.
But Brittany, can I ask you to just send Ellen the email on how to get into the Novus proper and what?
Yes.
Oh, no, I mean, when I click on the Novus, when I click on the agenda item on the agenda in Novus, usually all the documents come up for any of the applications.
Yeah, that wasn't carried over. It was strictly this memo, so you'll have to go back to the previous
Right, you have to go
items,
back
but
to
I'll
the
I'll
previous-
find it for you.
You have
Okay.
to go back to the previous meeting, or we have through a different way. Novus is the repository of every digital document for everything.
Yep.
You don't go in through the agenda, you go in as if you're logging onto Novus with a password. And
Oh, I see.
and we have the planning password, so you could go in. The problem with that is it's everything. Right, so you either have to go to a previous meeting or download it to your computer, which is what I do, for each meeting. So now I have a file in my computer for this particular, and I have everything that we've received. When we finish with an application, I archive it, and then after a while I delete it.
Yeah.
Right.
So I guess the only thing I really need to know is what was the previous date, and then I could maybe find it that way.
Hold on. I do have, they came on September 24th.
Okay.
Okay, that was the first time they came, yeah.
And I
They
guess,
said, we asked about emergency management and traffic, emergency management meeting, how are they going to get people out of the building, or how are they going to handle that and stuff like that.
Teresa, so how is this information going to be communicated to the applicants, since there doesn't seem to be anybody here tonight? It'd be a memo, or?
Yeah, I wanted to say a couple of things. I wanted to let you know that I did let the applicant know that that we were going to be having this discussion, and if they wanted to listen in, to feel free to do so, of course. I also said that there would be a memo that goes, I'm sure we'll just have Ashley add these items to her list. Or I'm sorry, Aaron will work with Ashley.
I'm taking notes. Yeah, no,
Okay,
I have a couple of questions, but I'll let you finish. Go ahead.
Okay, and the other thing I wanted to tell you is, it's my understanding that the Zoning Board of Appeals, as an involved agency, is going to be giving the planning board seeker comments as well. I've heard that from my colleague who appears on behalf of the Zoning Board of Appeals. So I just want to stress that this list that you're coming up with today can be added to at any point. It's not the end all and be all, but it will at least give the applicant something to get started with. And one thing in particular that Ashley's asked for is a full environmental assessment form, which may also lead you to ask additional questions once that's been filled out.
And so I just want to make sure that the applicant understands that this very comprehensive list is not the end of the road. We reserve the right to ask for more depending on where this information takes us. So I think that communication piece will be important, as I don't want an applicant to say, well, you didn't ask for that in the first round, and we have to argue for information we're entitled to.
You are the seeker lead agency. No one's objected to you being lead agency. And at this point, you're collecting information to assist you in making your determination of significance. And you don't have to make it until you have the information you need to make it. Okay,
And at what point in the process does the floodplain development permit come? Is that after the secret process or before?
after.
Thank you.
The permit for development in the floodplain is a building inspector permit, not a planning board permit.
That's right.
The information that's on that piece of paper is information that we will have and we will be reviewing in our secret process, but that actual piece of paper is not a planning board requirement. It's a piece of paper that goes to the building inspector. That's why it was not in.
Okay. Thank you.
Oh, so I guess we need HCCMC input as well.
It's entirely up to the involved agency whether they want to provide seeker input. That's up to them.
I mean, they may want to wait until we, make a determination of significance.
But they know what's going on. They know application is out.
Yes.
We
Yes, they
sent
do.
them, we sent them the notice of intent.
Okay.
Okay.
I would just add that by asking them to provide the full form, which we're recommending to do, that could also bring up additional questions and items of concern, even if you have a public hearing, as part of, while seeker is still open, you could have additional scope items identified at that point too. So
Right.
yeah, we can make it clear that this is not a final list at all.
This is the beginning of a process.
Correct.
Nowhere near the.
Just so I'm clear on some of the comments I've heard. For number 3, you asked for inclusion of the aquifer as well in the natural resources. Is that for withdrawal on the water or just impacts to it from pollution or otherwise? What was the specific request?
All of the above.
All of the above, and even the location of the aquifer. Maybe it's under the building, maybe it isn't. We don't know anything about this very large body of water.
Right, that's a good question. Okay. And then for 4, when you brought up emergency providers with relation to flooding, and then schools was mentioned, it might just make sense to have a section that's about community services. It just covers school, children generation, if you're interested in seeing that. Impacts to the service providers, fire, police, how many calls do they currently get to this area? Do they have concerns about the density or, increase the number of calls expected?
I mean, it's now an
operational in general, plus in an event of an emergency like a flood.
I mean, but specifically emergency response during flooding events, because right now this is an office building. And so people would be, there wouldn't be anybody there probably. People would be sent home, or when the flooding happens in the middle of the night, there's nobody sleeping there. This is now proposed to be an apartment building where there would be people there.
Right.
That would have to leave. And so how are they planning on dealing with this? I understand that some of the new buildings, or I was told, I did not go check this out personally, there's plenty of signs in the garages that this area is prone to flooding, please move your car. And people didn't move their cars, and over 300 cars were lost during Ida because people just didn't think it was going to happen. And so the cars all got flooded because the first floor is designed to flood. So everybody puts the parking on the first floor, and okay, how are we going to prevent loss of property and damage? So anyway, yeah.
Okay, well, maybe a community services specific analysis. It covers all that, including waste.
Yeah.
Waste.
Well, right, but I see the emergency response during flooding and the general impact on community services as 2 topics.
That's fine. Okay, and then for number 1, just adding, I mean, I guess multiple dwelling law will be covered as part of
the zoning code. Yeah.
Okay.
Right. But you have to point it out because it's relatively new.
Sure thing.
Right. So, and zoning code comment, including the multiple dwellings law.
Okay. So I'll talk to Ashley. We can get a revised memo together and then maybe have the board take a look before it goes to the applicant. Does that sound good, or do we just send it right to them?
Well, Teresa, Teresa's going to draft something, send it to Teresa. You can send it to me. If the board's okay with it, I'll look at it based on my notes. And if I feel like it's good, then, we can send it. Great.
Yeah, that'd be great, Erin. If you can just update the memo and send it to me and
Right.
Kathy, then we'll take it
Right.
from there. If the board's okay, we'll get the letter out. And it'll have qualifying language in it saying, this is not all, this is, this
Right.
is
Right.
the
And
comment.
copy Brittany so it can get posted on the internet as well. And it has to become part of the record, and it has to go into the Nova system. Right? Okay, great. This was fun. I'm tired. Okay, anybody have anything else for tonight? We will meet again before the holiday, but hope everybody's doing well with their preparations and not getting caught up in the supply chain. I do think we had some problems yesterday with the cloud. I was kicked off of a lot of sites and had to I guess I have cookies out there and they all got.
They got eaten.
I know, but when when you're at the gas station and you're trying to pay using your app and you don't remember your password. That happened to my husband. So he didn't get his 5 cents off a gallon. Anyway, all right, everybody, I need a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
The second,
Second.
that was second by Richard for the minutes. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, have a good night, everyone.
All right.
Good night.
You
Thank
too.
Thanks,
Okay,
Brittany, for coming
bye-bye.
in.
No problem. Thank you.
All right, bye.